everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today I have a very, very exciting piece to show you because it's plus size. It's honestly not that often that you stumble across a piece of clothing, piece of antique clothing, I should say, that is in a plus size. And that is because of survival bias, because plus size items tended to be worn more by more people, even like appearing in vintage shops and being purchased that way and being worn by more people that way, being used on stage. And so because of that, they would just get worn out and kind of disintegrate into nothing. And so that's why we don't see a lot of antique plus size clothing that is still in existence, especially if it's still in pretty darn good condition. So this dress that we are going to be looking at here comes from, I believe, the later teens, probably as late even as like the 1918, 1919, somewhere in there, because we are starting to see the waistline drop. Now that said, this lady who wore this dress was also honestly very tall. Like, frankly, we were probably pretty much the same height. I'm 5'10". As you can see, the shoulder of this dress form right now is actually higher than my shoulder, and this dress right now is coming to about my high ankle down to the floor. So that is how tall this lady was. And just so that you can get excited about the measurements just from the get-go, because I know that I have this on my smaller dress form here, it doesn't quite fit me or my larger dress form, which I'm just like, oh, we're so close. But she actually has a 42-inch bust and a 36-inch waist. Oh my gosh, isn't that exciting, right? A 36-inch waist, you almost never see that on surviving antique clothing. And so I was so excited to bring this piece to you. This was actually given to me a couple of years ago by my friend and former professor, Lynn. She gave me several pieces, including the one that I made a couple of years ago that came in the same lot. So I'll link to those videos down below if you want to see me remake a sort of mid to later 1910s dress as well. That one was probably more around 1915, but I will link those videos down below if you want to go check that out. At this time, I don't have plans to remake this in my actual size, but I'll never say never, because honestly, it's a really, really cute dress. And part of what I like about this dress, besides just how absolutely delicate it is, like, it is so frothy. We'll get into those details closer up as we go through this video, but it is just so frothy and light and summery, which is why I've been waiting to share this with you until we got to summer. So here we are, it's summer, or at least the weather is summer here in the Pacific Northwest as of today. And so that's why I'm so excited to share this piece with you, besides the fact that it is plus size. But the other thing that I really like about this is that it's taking a lot of historical elements, like 18th century elements, and putting them into the lens of the later 1910s. And again, you'll see this more as we go and look closer at this, but it has things like engagements in the sleeve ruffle at the elbow length sleeve, or this sort of like faux stomacher front here. And it just kind of like is so cool that they went and they took those historical elements and used them again as new in the 1910s. So I'm going to go ahead, take you off my tripod, and we are going to take a much closer up look at this really lovely frothy bit of summery plus size 1910s fun. So right away, I think you can really just see how absolutely frothy this is. We have this really, really nice fine mesh that's kind of just everywhere in this dress, and you'll see that more as we go through, but I particularly love the use of it on this double layer collar. So on this double layer collar here, we have, it is made out of just super, super fine mesh lace. You can see there are holes in this, and you'll see more of those as we go as well, but we have this lovely little ruffle with like the tiniest turned hem ever. I mean, that's hemmed. They actually hemmed this, even though it's not gonna fray, they hemmed it. And then I think, is this called entredeaux? I don't remember my terminology, but this embroidery that we have here that you even could run like a ribbon if it's really narrow through there, because it's got those little openings in there. But we have it in double layers, so there's two of those collars, and I'll show you the back here more in a second. But I just love how absolutely frothy that is. And then the same sort of ruffle is being used here along the neckline and the front sort of faux stem stomacher opening. And again, we do actually have that like entredeaux or whatever. I'm just going to call it entredeaux for the sake of this video, but we have that embroidery on the edge of this frothy mesh lace as well. And as you can see, this comes all the way down the front. We've got two of these, and it's creating this sort of stomacher front. Now, again, this is too large for this dress form. Unfortunately, just too small for my actual size dress form, but it does create this very sort of 18th century look here with this like faux stomacher front. Now, this closes up the side here mostly with snaps. We do have an actual hook at the waist, but the rest of these are just snaps, making this closure, and then it is sewn in place on the other side, so it only opens on this side here. And as you can see, even the fabric is extremely lightweight. I think you can see my fingers a little bit there through the fabric. This is 2 layers of the exterior fabric. That's what's being used on this like stomacher front here. You can kind of see the echo of it from the inside, like right there. But it's a really interesting fabric. Honestly, I'm not positive what it is, but I want to say it's a silk blend, probably, especially because of this slubbiness. It's almost like a raw silk blend, but it's, again, very sheer as well. It may be like a silk linen blend. That's a possibility because of just how lightweight and kind of breathable it is. I do find it interesting that they used the same fabric to line this piece because we do get that echo from the back, but I think it's a really interesting fabric texture and pattern as well. And you can see just how slubby it is in all of that. Turning her around just a bit here to look at the sleeve, you can see that we have sort of a fitted sleeve that is approximately elbow length, and like an 18th century dress, we have this little like ruffle engagement moment here with, again, more of the mesh lace from underneath. This is significantly wider than the mesh lace down the front. It's kind of more like at the collar, but you can see the little entredeaux in there as well. And that is just attached up right here with, again, more of this entredeaux that divides the little ruffle portion or little flounce portion from the rest of the sleeve. And so looking at the very inside of that, that is what that looks like. We've got the ruffle attached to just the flat that kind of looks like the flounce, and then that is all attached in at that little embroidery moment up there at the join. And again, all of that has that super narrow hem all along the edge. We do have a lot of wear on the sleeves. You can see that this one was actually mended or attempted to be mended quite a bit, like right here, but it just wasn't enough to save this sleeve. We really have kind of spider webbed the fabric here as it has gone into more and more of its holes. Here's a nice view of the collar in the back, so you can see those 2 layers. They are attached all the way up at the neck here. This one on my form is kind of pulling up and over, but I think that's just how it is on my form, not probably how it was worn. And then the back itself of the bodice is really cut very simply. We have the tiniest bit of gathering at the waist right here, but otherwise it is pretty much just like flat. And you can see that this has kind of gotten a gathered look over time, but frankly there is not actually much fullness that is gathered into the waist. So I think this is just kind of folds of how the fabric has been stored over time. This sleeve is actually in much worse condition even than the first. We have a giant gaping hole in the underside of this sleeve, but hey, at least it was worn and loved. Let's take a look at the skirts. So the skirts are quite slim. I have not attempted to measure the hips, but I would imagine that they would be much smaller in proportion than like your average clothing today would be waist to hips. And that is because in the 19 teens, we were still wearing corsets that really did come down quite low and slim the hips. And this would have been worn over that sort of corset and also probably a princess slip. We have really some odd seaming in here because we have one seam here that is quite off to the side, and there is not a seam over here to echo that. So I'm not really sure why that was done. Maybe it was just, this is how much fabric they have, and that is where the seam wound up laying. But because of that, it's being pulled up a little bit where that seam is, and that's why you're getting like all of this sort of almost a ruched gathering look right there. And then as we come down the skirt, we have sections here, inset sections of that mesh lace again with the little embroidery top and bottom. So it's nice because it echoes the top of the bodice. And then this upper skirt ends quite short and the bottom skirt continues quite a bit lower with more of the mesh lace. But also you can see that this whole bottom skirt is made out of the mesh lace. That is just the dress form that you're seeing right there. It is actually still the mesh that goes all the way up to the waist where that mesh stops. So it's really just so fine and light, this underlayer. I mean, both layers together, but the underlayer in particular, because we have so much of that mesh, and then we get the echo of the actual fabric, except this time it has been turned the other way. So we have our little dash marks going horizontally on both of these instead of vertically. And again, another little inset of the mesh, this time without any of the embroidery down at this bottom one. And down here, we just have a machine hem. So, you know, no worries on either of these hems. They're just machined, folded over a couple times. Same with this one right here. As you can see, we've got a big old stain right there as well. But just a machine hem. By the way, looking at the seam here, that random off-center seam, you can see that I'm pretty sure this part right here, this is just selvage of this fabric where they have seamed it together, whereas right here they have done a tiny little like finished off. They've whipped that around the top so it just acts as one piece. And then over here they haven't actually finished it off at all. It is just raw edge in here. And again, it feels quite silky, kind of like a raw silk. So that's why I'm thinking it's a silk blend probably. I've turned this back around now so that we can look at the front of the skirt, and a couple things that I want to point out here. For one, what I actually didn't notice when I was looking at the back is that the mesh underlayer here from this underskirt, it is actually continuous. So this band here is simply mounted on top of the mesh. If we look inside, you can see that the mesh is actually backing that band. Whereas right here at the bottom, it's not. Here it's been cut. So because it doesn't go any further than this bottom band, like it wasn't needed down below it, it is cut just here with a raw edge. But yeah, it does back that top band, and it is just simply mounted on top using, again, machine stitches with raw edges aplenty. And this underskirt has two seams, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't know if it's because the fabric wasn't wide enough or what, but we have our seam here, and then we also have our seam here. So both of them are in the front. They're kind of echoing the stomacher front, but that's actually just the underlayer that does that, not the upper layer. However, the upper layer does give us a clue as to why that seam that was in the back was off center, because we also have one off center seam in the front, and that is because it continues on up to become a closure down to this point right here. So just to zoom back a little, you can see from the waist there, that is the closure, and then it just continues on as a seam to the bottom. And here we're finding differences in the selvage. So remember in the back we had this piece have the selvage, but this piece did not. So this fabric, it's the full width or two widths, because here we have this upper piece now has the selvage, whereas the lower piece is actually just raw. So it's the reverse of the back, which makes a lot of sense. And just in case you were interested, I just took a measurement of the seam to seam. It is approximately 31 inches, which means that the total around is probably about 62 inches. So I guess there was a little bit more fullness in the hips actually than I realized. It's just that it's such fine fabric that it really doesn't look like that. You can see we've got a huge dye run from something there, unfortunately. I don't think it's its own dye, like it doesn't seem to be coming from one of these little bits. So I think it was something else spilled on it at some point. What I do find quite interesting about this closure is that obviously a lot of care was taken into actually making the closure this long, and yet it is sewn shut. So from here down, this closure has been sewn shut. I don't know if maybe the person making it got to, you know, making the whole thing and then realized before they put the hooks and eyes on that, oh wait, they don't actually need that and it would be easier to just do a simple whip stitch than put all those hooks and eyes on, or what? We do have one hook and bar right here at the waist though, because that is where the most tension is going to be, is at the waist. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this off of the dress form now and lay it out on the table so that we can hopefully get a better look at these really interesting insides. So honestly, the insides are really pretty simple, but what you might be surprised to find, which you just got a little sneak peek of, is that the entire inside of the bodice is lined with the mesh. It is cut separately to the waist. We have our unfinished seam here at the waist, but yeah, this is actually our lining. So this is what keeps it super, super sheer, but still gives it slightly more support than just having this exterior fabric, one layer of it by itself. So at one point, this mesh did go kind of everywhere. As you can see, there are now really quite large holes in the mesh, whereas most of the exterior, with the exception of the sleeves, is still in pretty good condition. But the mesh does cut away quite interestingly in the front of the bodice. So whereas the entire back was lined with mesh, and I believe it was treated as a one fabric, just looking at the seam, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think it was treated as one piece. The front, the mesh actually cuts away and it doesn't go all the way to like our front opening where the snaps are. So you can see that it's got its own little rolled hem here and it just doesn't quite carry all of that. So can you see where that line is here? So that is where the mesh cuts away to. For some reason, we don't get any mesh in this front section here. I have absolutely no idea why they would have done something like that, but I do find it very interesting. And also, obviously, it doesn't help with like the sheerness of this outer fabric. Like, obviously, this is providing nothing additional to make it so that your undergarments aren't showing through the exterior. So she probably would have had to wear quite a nice slip to match, because you definitely would have seen that slip through these layers of fabric. The mesh does not extend to the sleeves. The sleeves are just the single layer, by the way, of the exterior fabric. So just like with the skirt, the overskirt, there is no like lining there. When we look down here at the waist, it almost looks like a lining because this is the mesh from the underskirt and then that is the layer from the overskirt. But you can see where like the separation is when we go to look at the closure, because the mesh is not involved whatsoever in this closure section right here because it's a whole separate layer of skirt. So it's really only attached in at the waist, and then the two skirts act separately from each other. They have done a good job at their seam finishes here, by the way. We have a French seam going on in the bodice and it brings the layers together. So that's why you can kind of see that they were treated as one at the side seams. We have all of the mesh and exterior layers coming together in those French seams. And it actually looks like they had done that as well, even in the sleeve. So here we have the 3 layers because we only have the 1 of the mesh, but they are coming together into a French seam. Over here at the stomacher front, we can see that it has just been whip stitched in place. This is one of the only areas that we're getting really a lot of hand stitching, other than probably all of those narrow hems, which would have had to have been done by hand. But we have all of this just whipped into place. One mystery item that I think is very odd is this little bit right here. It might just look like a bit of fluff from this backside right here, but actually it's a snap. I have no idea why. This is the female end of the snap. I have no idea what it goes to. It is fully in the interior and it doesn't seem to hold anything in place. There is no male counterpart anywhere. So yeah, I have no idea why that's there, but it has been there, you know, for 100+ years. Just so you can get a better look at it, this is that closure that went down the skirt that has been sewn shut. I just thought you might like to see that up close so you can see where the underlayer is kind of cut away and hemmed back to avoid that space. And honestly, I think that's about all I have for you on the details of how this dress was made, but isn't it cool? Just so you can really see the full length of this, she really is very tall, which is so cool to see. So overall, I hope that you have really enjoyed this look at this really, really cool piece of history. Again, just so amazing to see something plus sized and something with this lining type that I have just never seen anything like that before. Let me know down in the comments if you've seen any other antique garments that are literally just lined with mesh, because I think that that's something really new and different and really makes a lot of sense for something that you're going to wear during the hot summer months. So if you liked this video though, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do have an entire series on antique garments, so I will link that playlist down in the description below if you want to go check that out. I do post here on YouTube at least once a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other random costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to take this time to give a humongous thank you to all of my amazing patrons. Seriously, could not do all of this without you guys, in particular those patrons at my Edwardian, Victorian, and Romantic level tiers, who are Sharon, Mirage, Laura, Jean, Janelle, Audra, Emily, Kim, Linda, Maria, Sarah, Tiffany, Liz, Chaos Chan, Denise, Kimberly, and Nurse Anita. Thank you again so much to all of my wonderful patrons, and thank you for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!